Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Ewing. I'm the Executive Director of the CBRS Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you today to a panel discussion with some of our SAS administrators who will be talking about some of the early lessons learned from our days here running in a commercial setting for CBRS. So go to the next slide, please. So the agenda is pretty simple today. It's welcome. I'll give some introductory information, and then we'll bring out the panel to discuss some questions that we prepared. Talk about things like the preparations for PAL or where we are now with PAL, and other great topics as you see here. And we'll go on. Next slide. So high level, what is OnGo and what is CBRS and CBRS Alliance? So next slide. So first of all, a little history of CBRS, and have some animation here. So yeah, we just continue on that. But basically, CBRS, the lineage goes back really arguably even further. But 2010, the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, which would be identified as the CBRS band, was identified for possible shared use. Some points going forward beyond that, the CBRS band, formally defined by the FCC in 2013, CBRS Alliance formed in 2016. The CBRS Alliance's primary mission is to bring LTE and eventually 5G and R, the 3GP-based technologies, to the CBRS band. In 2019, we received approval, or the FCC authorized initial commercial deployments, followed by full commercial deployments at the beginning of 2020. And then, of course, also the recently completed PAL auction. So next slide. So why is the spectrum shared? Historically, what is now the CBRS band has been used by other parties. Those parties are known as incumbents. The primary incumbent in the band, the U.S. Navy, but there are others, fixed satellite, ground stations, wireless internet service providers. And really, this whole concept of spectrum sharing is where the focus of today's conversation with our spectrum access system folks, our SAS admins, and that sharing mechanism is really effectively a traffic cop to make sure that the incumbents and the OnGo deployments work without or minimize interference as much as possible. So next slide. So a little about the technology behind what all this is going on, the spectrum access system. Really, that's the heart and soul of what makes all this work, utilizing an environmental sensing capability, effectively a set of antennas, listening for the incumbents, the Navy, the base stations in our world known as CBSDs. And these are the radio nodes that operate in the band, allowing for communication. And then finally, of course, the end user devices as well, that are the handsets, etc. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So again, not to belabor this is something that is well known now, but just to make sure everybody's level set, the band 48, what is known as band 48, the CBRS band, has 3 tiers from the sharing perspective. Starting at the bottom, tier 3, general authorized access. This spectrum is effectively open for use as long as there is no PAL or incumbent need for those particular for the spectrum. The next step up is the PAL, the priority access license tier, and this is where we've just completed the auction, where different commercial entities have purchased a PAL license. What this does is give them a level of priority in access to the spectrum. It does not give them exclusive rights to a channel, but if they are not using the channel, it basically is allowed, or the incumbent's not using the channel, that channel is available for general authorized access. There are 7 licenses. The channels are 10 megahertz channels, 7 licenses. The licenses are by county in the United States. And then, of course, at the top, the incumbents, these are the folks that get the spectrum, that have the highest priority on the spectrum. And really the incumbent here to focus on are the military radars, the naval radars. But as you see, there are others identified as well. You notice that the WISP, wireless internet service providers, are identified as an incumbent. That's under the old the Part 90 rules. There is a transition going on from Part 90 to Part 96, which is what the CBRS rules are. And so the WISPs that are currently operating today under Part 90 will become members of the CBRS family and operating in the tiers that Tier 2, Tier 3 that you see below. Next slide. So end user devices and equipment, availability for us here. We've already seen 130 end user devices. These are unique end user devices authorized by the FCC for operation in Band 48. So you have phones, laptops, tablets, data dongles, modules, modems, all types of end user devices. And then from the access point side, over 100 CBSDs have already been authorized by the FCC. And in addition, of that 100, 45 have completed OnGo certification as of today. And this is a mixture of indoor, outdoor. There's both categories of access points and base stations. A lot of different use cases that are available here for use and supported. Next slide. And just a very high-level view of our membership. It's a bit of an eye chart now, which we're very pleased with. At the top, you see our board members. So you see those companies prominently displayed, but then all of our members below playing an important role in this ecosystem and fitting into all different aspects of the ecosystem, really, from service provider, cable operator, equipment manufacturer, in-device manufacturer, and then end-to-end solution providers, and the list goes on. These are a really diverse group, and we're very pleased to have them as members. Next slide. And then just wanted to be a little clear on some of the lingo that we use, some of the language we use. CBRS really is talking about the band definitionally. It's specifically the 3.5 gigahertz band in the US that's defined by FCC Part 96. We talk a lot about OnGo, and OnGo is a brand name, and OnGo is LTE and 5G NR in the CBRS band. So it's a brand name like you see other brand names. It's really tied to the implementations of LTE, 5G NR in our band. So when you talk about OnGo, you're specifically talking in that regard. Next slide. So really enough about some of the basics here, and get into the meat of really why we're all together. Do our quick speaker introduction. This information, of course, will be available to you as well to see. Myself, I've been very fortunate to be the executive director of CBRS Alliance now for going on 2.5 years, and a very exciting 2.5 years. On the panel today, joining me, very fortunate to have folks that I've enjoyed working with immensely over the last 2.5 years, and look forward to working with further. The first of which, Mark Gibson, who's the Senior Director of Business Development and Regulatory Policy at CommScope. Mark is as you see here, 36 years of spectrum management experience. He's also a board member of CBRS Alliance. Participates extremely heavily in our work, both in CBRS Alliance, Wind Forum, the FCC, and one of the most respected voices in this space. And if we go on to the next slide, do a quick, brief introduction of our other two speakers. Gautam Gupta, who's Director of RAN Products for Amdocs, another one of our SaaS admins. And again, you see here, 30 years plus experience in the telecommunications industry. Amdocs, one of the SaaS admins that's been key in bringing the SaaS operations online, working with CBRS Alliance, Wind Forum, FCC, et cetera, again, to really bring this whole work to fruition. And then finally, Dr. Preston Marshall, who is also our chair of the board of directors at CBRS Alliance, and an engineering director and principal wireless architect at Google. Again, incredible wealth of experience. I can go on in a lot of respects. Preston is the soul of what we do. Mark is a lot of respects, the intellect of what we do, and that's not to underqualify the other guys. And Gautam, really the glue of this, showing how we can expand the ecosystem across the board. So I invite these gentlemen to join me on screen here. Thank you. And then on the next slide, just we'll have for reference who's talking. So, gentlemen, welcome, first of all, and thank you for participating here. The main topic today is what have we learned? And I guess over this last, we came under initial commercial deployment, just about a year ago. And then full commercial deployment really started in January. What have we learned? What has been the biggest surprise for each of you? And I'll start with Mark, since you're first on my screen here. What have you seen that has surprised you and been one of the most interesting lessons learned so far?
I'd say two things. And thanks, Alan, and thanks everybody for being here today. This is nice to be here. One of the things I think that I was surprised about is the auction itself. We were all wondering. There was a lot of, in fact, I think the Mobile Experts folks had done a couple of presentations to the CBRS Alliance, wherein they kind of estimated the auction would come in around 2 billion, a little over 2. I'd seen some estimates as high as 10, but coming in at 4.6 was a pleasant surprise. It meant this is real. Not that a $2.1 billion auction wouldn't have been real, but there were 271 participants, 228 winners. All but 2006 counties were auctioned off. Licenses were auctioned off. All but 287 counties were auctioned off, or licenses in all but 287 counties. And so I say that's a rousing success. I'd say also when you think about the diversity in license winners or in auction winners, running the gamut of education with folks from like Virginia Tech and other schools, cable companies. I think 4 cable companies participated in one licenses, as well as many wireless internet service providers, and of course the usual suspects. And so that was a pleasant surprise. The other thing I think, and for me it wasn't a surprise, and I reckon it wasn't for my colleagues here, but certainly this was out there in the air, is this is really complicated. And we've made it that way, and boy, the complication is going to keep people away. And I don't think that's the case. I think that'll be a surprise from folks that look at this and want to embrace it. There's the added complexity of the SaaS, but we've really worked hard to make that low impact, so to speak, or even low profile. It's you give a URL to the device and you're connected and everything works great. So I'd say for me, those are the two surprises. One was one my own, the other is I think the industry.
Gotcha. Gautam, how about you? What have you seen that has surprised you over the last year or impressed you particularly over the last year?
Yeah, I would concur with Mark. I think in terms of the auction, it's been a huge surprise. I think it beat all the analysts' predictions of how much money it's going to bring. Also, I think it's very significant because for so many years, CBRS has gone through all this process with certification, with the FCC rules, and when forum coming together. A lot of people always thought that this is just a science experiment. The government would never allow spectrum to be shared between the incumbents and for commercial use. So I think getting approvals for the ICDs, going through all of that was a really big step. And then obviously with the auction coming in, you can see that the industry is very serious about the spectrum. People have poured in really serious money to basically utilize the spectrum. Yeah. And also in terms of the whole ecosystem, I think in the last about a year or so, the ecosystem has evolved tremendously. You see hundreds of device manufacturers, both from a end user perspective and from the perspective of just the CBSD manufacturers who have ready equipment today. So if somebody wants to build a small network, I mean, if I have to build a small CBRS network in my neighborhood, it's really simple to do. Right. And I think which is very significant, which wasn't there maybe 6, 8 months or 10 months ago.
Gotcha. Interesting. Thanks. Press, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there were perhaps my perspective is different because back in 2012, we listened to lots of comments about how CBRS was unworkable and really undesirable. And I think seeing this whole process that played out in the last year have had a couple of messages. One was that although originally a lot of the major players in telecom couldn't see the virtue of the CBRS ecosystem, they really came to understand it, and we can see that in the fact that the people who participate in the PAL auction were many of the traditional suppliers. So I think we did see an acceptance, not just of CBRS, but of really different approaches to managing spectrum. Secondly, it's the dog that didn't bark. Nothing went wrong, despite the complexity of the system that we built. And I think, last week, We really did two things in CBRS. We created this relatively complex control structure and then abstracted it away so that it looks kind of like DNS. It's just a feature that's there and people don't really have to know about it. But we also did it in a competitive manner. So you have on this call 3 of, I guess, 6 SaaSes, so that the customers of CBRS have a choice of who they use for a SaaS. So if you don't think Google's quality is up, you can go buy from CommScope. If you find that they're too expensive, you can look for someone else. And so having competition among suppliers, we think, is going to make much more confidence in this band. No one wants a band where they're dependent on the interest of a single company. So I think we saw a whole lot of things get validated in this last year. It's almost hard to sort of rack and stack which one's the more important.
Right. Interesting. I know Mark touched on, the PAL auction, and that's being one of the things that's really been, key to all of this work. And we've had that as one of our gates that we've got to get through. And I think we got through that as Mark observed quite well and quite pleasant in looking at the numbers. Gotham, from your perspective, in looking at the PAL auction, what does this enable? From what are we looking at now with the PAL behind us, and what is the work that the SaaSes have to do beyond that?
Yeah, I think I think it opens a lot of potential from the market perspective, as you see a lot of investment by different industry verticals. I think from a SaaS perspective, I think we have to work together to get the PAL leasing options put in properly. I'm expecting that all the entities who want the PAL licenses would want to build networks. So I think it's our first job as admins, as SaaS admins, is to provide people the equitable interference-free PAL channels for wherever they have one. I think that's the first focus. Then the next focus really will be to look at the secondary market, where once the PAL licensee winners are able to utilize the spectrum, and then they figure out, okay, that some areas we don't need that spectrum, or some areas we can lease, we want to give it away to somebody else. Then that is when the secondary markets come in. Yeah, and also I think like all of us, we are working closely with the FCC in terms of working out the light touch leasing aspects as well. But I think the first focus really is to get to having the PAL licensee use their spectrum.
Thank you. Mark, anything from your perspective on that?
I would.
Where are we at now?
I'd agree with what Gautam said. I'd say that certainly being able to support the secondary market is important. The other thing we're working on right now is be able to have algorithms to support the PAL channel assignment. And so, that should be coming shortly. And again, they're probably now getting down and dirty of this. The Part 90.
We might have lost Mark. Chris, do you want to pick up from the Part 90 discussion?
Mark is in wireless internet service and probably shows that we need to do more work in that area. Mark, are you back on?
I know, am I?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, as the press said, I get my internet from a WISP. So enough said. But anyhow, the transition to Part 90 the transition from Part 90 to Part 96. That's supposed to the first wave of those guys is supposed to be completed by next month, the 17th actually. There's several waiver requests that have been filed, so we'll see. So getting that done, because I think for that, it's getting us away from while the fixed wireless access use case model is interesting. It's right. A lot of people look at that as the plumbing of this band. It's just the stuff you have to get the band working. The real stuff, I think Gautam said this, or maybe Press, is the private networks and being able to support that. And I think once we can really get private networks, whether private LTE or just private in general, up and running, I think that will be the unique aspect of this band. So that's when the band will realize its true potential.
I'll put a little bit different spin on it. I think getting the PAL auction out of the way was important if we had to do that. But if you look at the people who bought the PAL licenses, they're going to be a while before they deploy. So we have to do the work that's been described, no question. But we don't want to let that take our focus away from. There's a lot of people ready to move into that are moving into GAA right now, and so supporting them with better tools for managing coexistence, and getting the whole ecosystem. And this is the CBRS Alliance challenge. So it works like you just walk up with your box and plug it in the wall. You plug the RJ45 in and it works. Wi-Fi largely does that. LTE was built for tier 1 operators. And so making this a more scalable technology in CBRS Alliance. We have the plumbing for spectrum sharing. That was really exciting. It's, I wouldn't say job done, but we don't want to get too focused on the plumbing and not on the excitement, which is how do we make LTE and the capabilities of LTE and 5G work. And Wi-Fi is the gold standard, where it just works when you buy it and plug it out of the box. It's a more complex protocol. We got a lot of advantages, but that's the work stream that I would like to see people focus on now that the PAL auction, people have spent $4.5 billion. Okay, now it's time, because the real challenge is making the OnGo technology, which is the integration of this, play together and work and be approachable and scalable.
Gotcha. Building on that idea, of the simplicity, from a business vertical perspective, when you think about where this is going to be deployed, where we've seen it deployed, where we thought it was going to be deployed, and where it actually got deployed. What, Press, I'd ask you to expand on that. What is some of the business, vertical impact here that we've seen as this has rolled out in practice?
Well, we've certainly seen, I think we've seen what we expected, which was there was both regulatory pressure and customer demand to immediately move in for fixed wireless because they own both ends of the link. They don't have to wait for handsets. Handsets have only been out for about a year. So the handset dependent applications, not surprisingly, really are being prototyped and experimented with, but they're not being widely deployed. Fixed wireless, I think, is deploying basically as rapidly as people can get equipment and get it up and the vendors can support. And so what we have to be, moving on to is the private LTE and the neutral host, which are business model questions every bit as much as they are technical. And that, I think, is a challenge. I wouldn't have expected to see it. So we don't really have evidence that it's a good or bad idea yet, because they're both handset dependent. And unless you bought a really premium handset last year, you've only had 8 or 10 months of handset availability. So we need about 3 years to get to the point where most handsets have band 48.
Right. Yeah, the exciting news from that is we are seeing that adoption in the handset space. And so that's really exciting. Like you said, it's the flagships, then moving down into the rest of the portfolio for the companies. Gautam, how about you from that business vertical perspective? And, Press brought up neutral host and, the private LTE, and maybe elaborate a little bit on that from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the LTE technology, I would agree that it was primarily built for large wireless operators. It's supposed to be fairly complex, having a core network with multiple entities in there, having base stations all over the place. So I think what we have done is basically try and simplify a lot of that from our perspective in Amdocs. We have something called zero touch integration. So the objective really is that you can onboard new devices and base stations very quickly, have minimal configuration, more like plug and play, that you plug in a device, goes through all the DHCP and everything else, goes through firewalls, and it's able to power up pretty quickly and self configure as well. So I think we are trying to basically take the complexity out of this equation. So that is one aspect of trying to make the solution simpler, easier, and more palatable for our end customers to use. besides CBRS. I think the other aspect really is the different industry verticals. I think nobody would think that a school district would want a wireless network of their own, and especially with COVID-19, it's very unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation all over the world, but we see a lot of interest and a lot of activity in these very different verticals where historically they wouldn't bother about connectivity at all. And I think the CBRS band with the spectrum share is really, I would say, it accelerates and it's a catalyst for people. It lowers the barrier for anybody who wants to build a network.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've had that experience in my discussions as well. The expected verticals and the actual verticals, the influence of COVID, noticeable for sure. Mark, how about you? From a business vertical and the the implementation of things like neutral host, where do you see this playing out as well?
Well, that's a good question. I wanted to address the whole notion of LTE. I mean, obviously LTE is more complex than most RAN technologies, but it's not. That doesn't mean it's not accessible by the masses, so to speak. There's a lot of local telcos that are deploying, low-cost LTE solutions. And what they want is they want the benefit of a managed network that you really can't get, with most other types of technologies, with the possible exception of Wi-Fi, and even then, that's not truly managed. So I'd say that that's one thing that the LTE flavor of this is not necessarily, just by definition, high-end wireless operator, and so that opens up a whole new group of people that want managed networks. And so when you think about it in terms of business verticals, there's a bunch of them that we can deal with, the healthcare, MDUs, hospitality, all of that. We've talked about in the realm of private networks, and I think Gautam alluded to, this COVID time we're in. One of the things that we did on the Ruckus side of the business, we deployed a lot of category A CBSDs to facilitate a lot of the triage testing that hospitals were doing, sort of away from the building. You drive by, you get tested. Some of those backhaul connections were done using some of the Ruckus Wi-Fi or CBRS devices. So, and we were able to stand that up pretty quickly. And that wasn't a science project. That was something that we needed to do quickly, and the range of Wi-Fi would not accommodate that. It was too far away from the building. So those are things I think that once we get through this period and find out that necessity being the mother of invention, we'll find a lot of other types of applications we really never thought about going into this. But those are just a couple that I think, when you just consider the need and the way we were able to service that right away with something like CBRS, we wouldn't have been able to do that a while back. We would have had to set up some sort of a 5 gig link, unlicensed between those facilities. And so I think, this is one great aspect of CBRS that we've been able to deploy right away.
Gotcha. Mark, staying with you, asking you to look into your crystal ball, or, the Ouija board is one of my favorite things. What do you see? This last year has been incredibly eventful, and for reasons also that we didn't expect. But looking a year or two down the road, what do you see from the SaaS admin perspective in your crystal ball?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for the most part, from the SaaS perspective, without giving away any special sauce, the hard part's done. Getting a SaaS built, tested, and through certification, building an ESC network, getting all that certified, and then getting out there and generating commercial service, that's the hard part. I think the next part is, well, what do we do with this thing? What are some special things that we can do to help facilitate the interaction? Some of it may not necessarily be CBRS related. The band right below this, the 3450 to 3550 meg band, they're talking about sharing something like this. There's international considerations that we need to keep in mind for the type of spectrum wherein it's encumbered. So I think what we're going to do is try to more evangelize the concept of centralized dynamic spectrum management, so people aren't so frightened about it, and try to minimize the complexity aspect of it. We ran into these first issues, and my colleagues will remember this, back in the early days of what was before LTE, which is 3G, 4G, 5G. People were really concerned about the complexities. Well, if you compare, what we've got now versus the early ANTS phones, it's just like it's warp speed. And so, and we've sort of adopted this, by rote. So I think, convincing folks that this is not, don't be frightened of the technology, don't be frightened of the complexity. We've got this. We, the engineering teams, we, the business people, can make this work. So let us do this and let us make it happen for new and exciting opportunities.
Press, how about from your crystal ball?
Yeah, I'll go a bit different direction than Mark. Don't disagree with any of it, but my view is that the SaaS will just sort of morph into the broader question of planning networks. Right now, people are deploying relatively small networks that's for mobility type applications. They're doing production networks for fixed wireless. More and more people are not going to want to think of a SaaS product and a network planner, and so we have to get to the point where we offer people a higher degree of integration, where the SaaS just becomes something that's along for the ride. So our current thrust is bringing all of Google Earth and its sub-meter awareness of environments to help people plan the network as part of the SaaS. So you've got the SaaS data, you understand who's there, you understand the usage. Then you bring in the fact that we know what kind of buildings between these two alleys. The model we were forced to use by the government, somewhat sarcastically, is the Earth 360 million years ago, before even there were trees, God forbid, huts, buildings, e-glass, all this stuff. None of it existed. And we're still modeling the propagation that way. So bringing propagation modeling and network modeling towards something that uses the geo resources that we use when we drive our car, that we look at before we go anywhere, bringing those resources and integrating them into the SaaS environment and the CBRS environment, so people don't go 15 different places to collect it. They don't have to buy a $10,000 a month subscription to some specialized product built for tier ones. All of this makes it more approachable. We've already, like WISPs are surprised. Yeah, you didn't measure any interference because you measured that in summer, but we can tell you that those trees were all deciduous and they're all going to lose their leaves. So come December, you're not going to like it. So bringing that level of data to network operators will make this whole thing a lot more seamless experience. Right now, we got all the pieces, but we're plumbing it together, and we don't want that to be how it appears to our customers.
Good. Thanks, Brett. Gautam, how about you? From your perspective, what's in the crystal ball for the future?
Yeah, I think I would. It's interesting how the CBRS band has evolved. Where a few months ago, everybody thought that it would be the major mobile operators or the MSOs and MNOs who would focus on this. And you see the industry change very differently. You look at the number of different industry verticals who bought spectrum in the PAL licenses. So we see a lot of uptick in business from that aspect. Also, in terms of private wireless networks, it's not just people-to-people talking or using it for voice or data. It could also be for a lot of the IoT services, command and control, SCADA information, and a lot of these industrial automation vertical as well, using CBRS band. And we see that today with some of our customers who are using this spectrum not just to connect people or human being to the internet, just for voice, but also connecting machines together. So we see that area to expand significantly. Our role really is not just to provide SaaS and CBRS and manage spectrum, but also lower the complexity for people to build networks, for them to be able to fit this quite easy together like Lego pieces and say, here's a network to build out. So I think that's where the world is going. If you look at a lot of these very difficult applications that we used to have many years ago, now all you have is a simple app on your phone and one click gets you someplace. So our emphasis really is to remove all the engineering complexity out and let the business people achieve their business goals.
Thanks. Good. So we have a few minutes left. Mark, I'll start with you. What other points should we be making here to help people understand, get comfortable, understand the resounding success really that we've achieved?
Well, I'd say join the alliance, and participate. Not to make a sort of a blatant attempt to, troll for membership, but I think, a lot of the work has been done both in the WinForm and the CBRS Alliance. But the WinForm is really, I referred to plumbers earlier. We're sort of the mechanics of this. The CBRS Alliance is the industry association for CBRS and the brand, the OnGo brand. So. I'd say, if you haven't already joined, membership certainly has its privileges. You can be part of this too. And I'd say that you can ride the rocket ship as it's going up. I'd say that it's a great future. We've got tens of thousands of CBSDs since we started 9 months ago doing this, and so that's a pretty good amount happening. And I have a slide from another presentation that shows we'll have several hundred thousands of these probably by 2024. And so this is going to be exciting. And when you consider about this being sandwiched between two high-powered bands, notwithstanding the potential for interference, but what this band means to support that type of operation, I'd see it's pretty exciting just dealing with the opportunities that'll make for CBRS.
Got it. Thanks, Mark. Gautam, back to you. What any points you'd like to make sure we cover before we finish up today?
Yeah, I think we see this as an exciting future. I think our concern really is like mentioned that the sandwich between two bands, especially if you look at the lower end, the 3550 aspect of the spectrum. It's great that there'll be more spectrum available that the government is going to have people use. But I think looking at that and seeing high power base stations is one concern in terms of how they would interfere with devices on the CBRS band or interface with the ESCs. But I think on the flip side, there's going to be more spectrum for folks to use for their wireless and connectivity needs.
Got it. Thanks, Gautam. Press, last words.
Yeah. Okay. I'll basically add a little bit on to Mark's. We have done the work to make the band work, and so the band works. We've done that job, and we've done it actually, I think, rather remarkably well. We haven't crashed any airplanes or anything. What we haven't yet done, and what's important in the Alliance Charter, is we don't have all these business models in a way that people can understand. For example, if I build neutral host, how do I work with carriers? If I build private LTE, how do I manage roaming with MNOs? These are still the things where they're all sort of under the OnGo brand kind of arrangements. And I think it's important that people not think of CBRS just as a bunch of technologies that are done, but there's a whole pile of business models that we still need to work. I kicked off the business working group in CBRS Alliance a couple of years ago, and that we had the largest participation because those are the issues that the membership really needs to work. What does a standard arrangement look like? Who pays who for what? How do we do multi-SIM, eSIM provisioning, and handover? And so these are the issues that whether you're a large company or small company, you really care about because they're the business model that will drive things. And so we've got the technical model kind of done. To some extent, that was easier because there were less players. But we still need to do a lot of work on the business model that works for everybody in the ecosystem. And that work is ongoing. And we need more participation in it. We need more perspectives brought to it. That's why we formed CBRS Alliance, because we didn't want a few people doing it in the back room. And people need to come and be part of that.
Exactly. I second all of that. And Mark, you're angling in on my job, which is recruitment and trolling for members. So, but that's okay. I appreciate the backup.
No worries. Many hands make light work.
We'll give him your bonus.
Want to thank our panel. Exceptional as always in the discussion and always enlightening and a lot of fun. So I wish to thank you all for your participation. To our audience, I wish you safety, good health, and appreciate your attendance as well. If you do have questions, you can let us know about those, and we'll be happy to field those back to you I'm always happy to talk about the Alliance, and connect you with our members as well. So with that, I bid you a good day. And again, thanks to our panel, and everybody take care. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hi everybody, I'm Mark Gibson. I'm on to do a little wrap up for about 5 minutes. There were a few questions that came in while we were on the panel, but in the meantime, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, Alan Ewing, Gautam Gupta, and Dr. Preston Marshall. Enjoyed doing that session, and you can see from just the discussion we had over 40 minutes, there's a lot of activity going on. So we had a couple questions come in during this session. The first question is, can you share what you expect the first PAL spectrum blocks to be live, or are some already? And the answer is no, there's no PAL spectrum blocks live just yet. The first thing that has to happen is that the SASs have to be able to allocate spectrum to PALs. And there's an entire PAL channel assignment algorithm that we're going through amongst ourselves to get that set up. And it's not trivial. As you might imagine, there are many issues to deal with. It's kind of like the roll of wallpaper that, as you roll out one end, it rolls up on the other. We're trying to sort out how you make it fair, how you give licensees who bought more than one channel in a market and in multiple markets the notion of something called contiguity, so that the channels could be next to each other in terms of spectrum. Both in spectrum and in markets, so that they can have a fairly simple ability to acquire equipment, rather than at other ends of the band. And then how that gets changed when you deal with incumbents. And so it's not easy. And so we're looking to have the PAL channel assignment capability done within the next month or two, and be able to roll it out in SASs by the end of the year. And so for some people that just bought PALs, that might be a little bit chilling, but we want to do it right, and it's not easy. And so we're, as SASs, expecting to issue some documentation on this shortly. So stay tuned, and there'll be more information about that. So that was a great question, and thank you, Joanne LeMay, for that question. The second question was interesting, about whether there are consideration to harmonize the technical requirements across all the spectrum that's been made available in the mid bands, at least in the United States. So when you consider the CBRS band, and I think we made an allusion to this in the session, the CBRS band is in the middle of what is now the C block, which is on the upper side, is the 3.7 to 4 gig, or actually, to be accurate, 3.7 to 3980. That's the portion that's allocated. And then below that is the 3450 to 3550 meg band, which is brand new. C-band information has been out there for a while, and the C-band auction will be happening in a little less than a month and a half. December 8th is when that auction starts. And so the C-band and the 3450 to 3550 meg band are both going to be high power. Maximum power will be somewhere in the order of 3,200 watts per megahertz in rural areas, and about 1,600 watts per megahertz in urban areas. Same thing with the 3450 to 3550 meg band. And so, and in the middle of use at CBRS, where the maximum power is 50 watts for Category B device. So that means that you've got this sort of island in the middle, CBRS, that's bookended on either side by high power operations. And so, at least as it relates to the C-band, the industries are working to try to, I'd say, deconflict issues across the band, adjacent band issues, for the upper end of the CBRS band, which is GAA, and then the lower end of the CBRS band, or the C-band. And so right now, going on in the C-band construct, there are multi-stakeholder discussions, one of which is this specific one, to try to address at least adjacent band coexistence issues. And so that'll continue its work. And then there's work going on within the CBRS band, within the Wireless Innovation Forum also. And in fact, a lot of those people are the same. So we're not sure exactly what we're going to end up with. We hope it's fairly lightweight, something that might even be able to use in the SAS. If not, there could be a lot of things, including filtering or power limitations by band edges or at market edges, and a lot of things. And so we'll see how long that takes to put together, but that's in the C band. And then finally, in the 3450 to 3550 meg band, that band has just been rolled out. There's a rulemaking that's active right now. In fact, the commission voted on it a couple of weeks ago. We don't know if that comment period has started on that. Pretty sure it hasn't. And so that's going to be same, like I said, with C-band, except the incumbents in that band will be very different. There will be military incumbents or federal incumbents or DoD incumbents. And so we're going to have to work that out with them. But again, the users of that band will probably be the same as the users in the C-band. So that's the power issue. Then there's the issue with TDD timing. And we're sorting this out now within CBRS to try to get TDD frame syncs or coordinate on TDD frame sync synchronization and timing synchronization, at least within the CBRS band. And then so part of the collaboration with the C-band folks is not only the interference of the high power base stations, but to sort out the timing synchronizations as well. And given that the likelihood is in the lower 100 megahertz and the 3.45 to 3.55 gig band will be probably the same folks, whatever we do in the upper end, we should be able to do in the lower end. So those were very good questions. That's all I think I have for now. So I want to thank everybody for participating in the session. Thank you for your questions, and look forward to meeting and talking to you all sometime in the near future. So thanks again.